Lisa Bennett vanished without a trace on a rainy November night. Years later, more women connected to a mysterious charity disappeared one by one. At the center of it all was Harold Crane, a man who vanished long before the killings began, only to be found living a secret life, hiding a darkness so twisted no one saw it coming. This is the story of the most evil serial killer you've never heard of. In the small town of Millfield, life had always moved at a gentle pace. The streets were quiet, neighbors knew each other by name, and nothing out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen. But all that changed one cold November night when Lisa Bennett disappeared. Lisa was 24, full of life and dreams, working at the local bookstore and planning to start her own graphic design business. On that rainy evening, she left a friend's house to walk home, just a short distance away. She never arrived. The town was stunned. Lisa's family reported her missing the very next day, and the police launched an immediate search. Volunteers combed through the nearby woods, patrolled the streets, and posted flyers with her smiling face. But no one had seen or heard anything unusual. There was no sign of a struggle, no dropped belongings, no hint of where she might have gone. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks. The initial hope that Lisa had simply gotten lost or taken off on an unplanned trip faded as the silence grew heavier. The police investigated every lead, talked to everyone who had seen her, and checked security cameras around town. But the trail was cold. The only clue was a faint footprint near the edge of the forest, but it was too blurry to be useful. The community felt the weight of uncertainty. Parents worried about their own children, and whispers spread about strangers and danger lurking in a place that had always felt safe. The local news covered the story extensively, but soon other headlines took over, and Lisa's disappearance slipped quietly into the background. However, for her family and friends, there was no forgetting. Her mother kept Lisa's room just as it was, hoping for her daughter's return. Her younger brother stared at the empty seat at the dinner table every night. The town's police chief, a man known for his dedication, refused to close the case. Deep down, he believed something terrible had happened, but without evidence, there was little more he could do. What nobody realized was that Lisa's disappearance was just the beginning. Over the next several years, more women from Millfield went missing under similarly mysterious circumstances. Each time, the community braced itself for news, but the pattern was unclear and the fear grew. The killer was careful, striking silently and vanishing before anyone could catch a glimpse. The police were left chasing shadows, their frustration mounting. Every lead turned cold. Every clue disappeared like smoke in the wind. It was as if the town itself was cursed, hiding a darkness beneath its peaceful surface. As time passed, the missing women became names and faces in news reports and cold case files. The town tried to move on, but the unease remained, a quiet dread that no one could explain. In Millfield, the night was no longer safe, and the shadow of an unseen evil stretched long and far, waiting for its next victim. After Lisa Bennett disappeared, the town of Millfield struggled to return to normal, but slowly, a terrifying pattern began to emerge. Over the following years, more women vanished without explanation. Each disappearance was like a dark whisper spreading through the community, stirring fear and confusion. The missing women were different ages, backgrounds and lifestyles, but something unseen connected them all. The first few cases seemed isolated. People thought maybe the women had run away or started new lives elsewhere. But as the numbers grew, those hopes faded. Each disappearance carried a strange signature. The women were last seen near quiet, isolated places, wooded areas, abandoned buildings, or empty streets late at night. When some bodies were found, it was clear the killer took time to stage the scenes, arranging the victims in unsettling ways. It was as if the killer wanted to leave a message, though no one could decipher it. The police were desperate. They threw all their resources into the investigations, but the killer was always one step ahead. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no surveillance footage that could identify the suspect. The crimes were methodical and precise, leaving no clues behind. The frustration among the officers grew, as did the panic in the town. Rumors began to circulate. Some said a stranger was lurking in Millfield. Others whispered about a dark presence stalking the streets. Parents warned their children not to go out alone after dark, and the town's usual sense of safety eroded. Local businesses put up security cameras and hired extra guards, but none of it stopped the disappearances. The victims' families suffered in silence, their grief compounded by the mystery surrounding their loved ones. Support groups formed quietly in basements and community centers where people shared stories and fears. Still, the killer's identity remained hidden, and the terror only grew. One of the strangest aspects was how the killer seemed to choose victims connected by invisible threads. Each woman had volunteered or worked at a small local charity called Safe Haven, a shelter that had closed suddenly years before. It was a detail that went unnoticed by many, but became a crucial clue in the unfolding mystery. The police began to investigate Safe Haven's history, hoping it might lead them to the killer. But the shelter's records had been wiped clean, and its founder had vanished without a trace. The charity had been a quiet place, known to few, but it held the key to understanding the darkness spreading through Millfield. As the years passed, the killer's presence became a shadow that hung over the town. The disappearances stopped for a time, only to start again with renewed violence and cruelty. It was clear the killer was not done. The people of Millfield were caught between hope and fear, searching desperately for answers, while the killer continued to operate in the shadows. The once peaceful town had become a hunting ground, and no one knew when or where the next attack would come. The killer's silence was deafening, and the mystery only deepened. The townsfolk began to realize that this was no ordinary criminal. This was someone who understood fear and control on a terrifying level. Someone willing to destroy lives and leave a trail of horror without ever being caught. Millfield had become the stage for a nightmare. And in the darkness, the killer waited, watching, planning, ready to strike again. Years passed, and the investigation into the string of disappearances in Millfield had grown cold. The police had followed every lead, interviewed hundreds of people, and searched countless places, but the killer remained elusive. Frustration and fear lingered in the town, but hope was fading. Then, a retired detective named Robert Hayes decided to look into the case again, not because of new evidence, but because something about the victims didn't sit right with him. Hayes spent hours poring over old police reports, photos, and case files. He noticed a small detail that had been overlooked. Every woman who had vanished had volunteered or worked at a charity called Safe Haven. The shelter had closed abruptly years before the disappearances began, and its records had been mysteriously erased. This connection was something no one had seriously pursued, but Hayes believed it might be the key to unlocking the mystery. Digging deeper, Hayes uncovered that Safe Haven was founded and run by a man named Harold Crane. Crane was a quiet figure in the community, rarely seen or talked about, yet behind the scenes, his past was filled with troubling stories, whispers of abuse, manipulation, and secrets he had kept hidden for years. When Hayes checked into Harold Crane's whereabouts, he found something even more shocking. Crane had disappeared long before the killing started, and no one knew where he had gone. The detective's curiosity turned into obsession. He spoke to former employees of Safe Haven, who spoke in hushed tones about Crane's strange behavior and his harsh control over the charity. Some believed Crane was hiding something, but fear kept them silent. The pieces of the puzzle began to come together. Crane had built a network, controlled people, and had enemies. But who knew if he was connected to the murders? Hayes found evidence suggesting Crane's disappearance was staged. Records showed a fake identity had been created for him, allowing Crane to vanish without a trace. The detective followed the trail, which led beyond Millfield to a nearby town. There, in an unexpected place, a local library, Harold Crane was found living, quietly under an assumed name. The revelation stunned the police department. Crane had been hiding in plain sight all along, his double life carefully concealed. Investigators began to examine his life closely, discovering disturbing details about his relationships and actions. Harold Crane wasn't just a man with a mysterious past. He was someone deeply connected to the victims, someone who knew how to cover his tracks. As authorities dug deeper, it became clear Crane had been watching the town, manipulating events from the shadows. His disappearance had been a calculated move to avoid suspicion, allowing him to carry out his dark plans without interference. Every clue pointed back to him. But the full truth was even more horrifying. The town of Millfield was shaken to its core. A man who had seemed so ordinary was revealed to be at the center of a twisted web of crime and cruelty. The investigation shifted focus, preparing for a confrontation that would expose secrets buried for years. Harold Crane's capture would change everything. It would force the town to face its darkest fears and finally bring some answers to the families who had waited in agony. But even as the net closed around him, questions remained. How had he managed to deceive everyone for so long? And what horrors still lay hidden behind the quiet smile of the man who had fooled an entire community? The search for justice was only beginning. When Harold Crane was finally found living under a false identity in a neighboring town, the shock that rippled through Millfield was overwhelming. For years, he had managed to slip through the cracks, hiding behind the mask of an ordinary man. His quiet life as a librarian was a stark contrast to the dark secrets he carried. Secrets that linked him to a series of chilling crimes that had haunted the town for more than a decade. The authorities wasted no time. Once Crane was in custody, investigators began to unravel the tangled threads of his past. His calm, composed demeanor during questioning only deepened the mystery, as if he was always several steps ahead. It became clear that Crane was not just a man on the run. He was a mastermind who had carefully planned his disappearance and the crimes that followed. Further digging into his history revealed a man consumed by bitterness and revenge. Before Safe Haven closed, rumors had circulated about Crane's abusive and controlling behavior, but no one had dared to speak openly. He had built a facade of charity and goodwill, but behind the scenes, he ruled with cruelty and fear. Many believed that the women who volunteered at Safe Haven were his targets because they had threatened to expose him or disrupt his control. This investigation uncovered a horrifying pattern in how Crane selected his victims. He targeted women who represented the parts of his past he wanted to erase, those who stood against him, who had defied his authority, or who simply reminded him of his own failures. The careful staging of crime scenes was more than just cruelty. It was Crane's way of exerting power even in death, sending a twisted message to a world that had rejected him. One of the most unsettling discoveries was Crane's ability to manipulate those around him. Friends, neighbors, even some officials had no idea who he really was. He had crafted an identity so convincing that no one suspected the darkness lurking beneath. His ability to blend into society was part of what made him so dangerous. As the case unfolded, chilling evidence came to light. Journals, photographs, and cryptic notes hidden in his home that painted a disturbing picture of a man obsessed with control and domination. He had documented his crimes in meticulous detail, as if preparing for a future where he could tell his story on his own terms. The community struggled to comprehend how someone they had seen as harmless could be capable of such evil. Families of the victims, long haunted by grief and unanswered questions, finally found a sense of closure. But the horror of what Crane had done remained deeply unsettling. The trial that followed was a media sensation. Each detail revealed more about Crane's twisted mind, his motivations, and the lengths he went to avoid detection. His cold calculations and manipulations shocked everyone who listened. Though Crane was eventually convicted, the scars left on Millfield would never fully heal. His story became a chilling reminder of how evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces, and how sometimes the worst monsters are the ones we never see coming. The arrest of Harold Crane sent shockwaves through Millfield, shaking a town that had long lived in fear and uncertainty. His trial became the most intense and closely watched event in the town's history, drawing attention from across the country. People wanted answers, and for the first time in years, those answers were within reach. The courtroom was filled with emotion as the prosecution laid out the chilling evidence against Crane. Details of his calculated crimes shocked everyone: how he had lured victims connected to the charity he once controlled, how he staged each scene to confuse investigators, and how he had lived in hiding for years while the town suffered. The horrifying journals and photographs found in his possession painted a vivid picture of a man consumed by darkness and revenge. Throughout the trial, Crane remained unnervingly calm. His silence spoke volumes, revealing a man who accepted his fate but refused to show remorse. Psychologists called to testify described him as a master manipulator with a deep desire for control. They explained how his actions were not random, but driven by a twisted need to punish those who had crossed him, making each crime a carefully planned act of cruelty. The families of the victims found the trial both painful and necessary. 4 years. They had lived with unanswered questions and endless grief. Now, they finally saw the truth emerge, piece by piece. Some found moments of closure, while others struggled to reconcile the man on trial with the person they once knew. As the jury deliberated, the town held its breath. When the verdict was read, Harold Crane was found guilty on all counts. A sentence that confirmed the nightmare Millfield had endured was the work of one man's evil design. The trial's end did not bring instant peace. The memories of those lost and the scars left behind would linger forever. Millfield began the slow, painful process of healing, knowing that the darkness that had haunted them was finally behind bars. But the story of Harold Crane served as a grim warning. Evil can exist anywhere, hidden beneath the surface of ordinary life. In the years that followed, Millfield worked hard to rebuild trust and safety. New community programs emerged, dedicated to supporting victims and preventing such tragedies from ever happening again. The shelter that had once been safe haven was reopened under new leadership, symbolizing hope and renewal. Still, the shadow of Crane's crimes remained a part of the town's history. People spoke of the case with a mixture of sorrow and resilience, remembering the victims and honoring their memories. The story became a powerful reminder that vigilance and courage are necessary to confront darkness wherever it hides. The legacy of the most evil serial killer no one ever heard of was sealed not just by his conviction, but by the strength of a community that refused to be broken. Millfield's quiet streets once again felt safe, but beneath the calm was a collective determination never to forget, and never to let such evil rise again.